Rink wide Vancouver, Jeff and Irf with you here, a midweek pod this time around as we continue to try and stay on top of everything that's happening in and around the National Hockey League and, of course, focusing on the Vancouver Canucks. Now, we're into the waiting game here, Irf, because since we last did this, a few days have lapsed, certainly got through the weekend. That long list of free agents remains untouched for the Vancouver Canucks. And I have to say, and maybe it's because of that, maybe it's because the Stanley Cup Final has now started as well, but I am surprised as we approach the middle of June, we're not starting to hear a lot of names attached to the Vancouver Canucks necessarily in terms of, we know who they have on their own list to try to take care of, but they're not going to be able to retain all their own free agents. Haven't heard a ton of names. I mean, there have been some suggestions out there, but I think over the next 7 to 10 days, that side of things is really going to ramp up. And even more so if we find out definitively that some of these names like Lindholm, like Zadorov, that we've been talking about here on Rink Wide, that they're going to test the open market and ply their trade somewhere else.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think we'll start with Elias Lindholm. It's obviously been speculated out there that, you turn down a 7x7 offer. It's $49 million. That's a lot of money. I mean, the market value for him, to be completely honest with the people that I've talked to, is anywhere between $7.5 and $8 million for Elias Lindholm. I'm not entirely sure the Canucks are comfortable getting up that high for him. There were talks and reports about him turning down some ludicrous offers in Calgary that are earning around $9 million. That's not true. Don't believe it got anywhere near $8.5 million or over that point. So the Lindholm one's going to be interesting because I think that there will be suitors for him at what he wants. I mean, we've said on this pod before, Jeff, and many other shows that we've both been on, Elias Lindholm's going to get what he wants. Now, like you just mentioned off the top there, it's who's next. And it's not kind of from within. There's no names that have been linked. And you kind of go through the names of centers a little bit. Chandler Stevenson probably going to get paid somewhere, to be completely honest. Sean Monahan's an interesting one, to be completely honest. Made $2 million last year. I think that was kind of a handshake agreement with the Habs that said, okay, I'll stay if you trade me at some point, which is one of those things that happened. But that's one that I would keep my eye on if I was a Canucks fan. Obviously, 29 years old. He's probably going to want a little bit of term. But it'd be interesting to see if that's the direction they decided to go, if they really do believe in having three centers down the lineup.
Well, and that's been, so much talk from Rick talking about how much he liked that luxury of being three deep down the middle. And I've sort of said all along, as much as I was impressed with Lindholm in the playoffs, I just don't know that you can commit as much money as it would take to have those three, certainly with Elias Pettersson's new contract kicking in, and JT's not going anywhere now coming off the season that he's had. And so, one of those guys would be your third line center. What a luxury, but at what price point? So, it does beg the question, because Pia Suter was signed late in free agency last year to be a center. Now we know that the Canucks moved him around, and he is truly a Swiss Army knife, and he was flexible and versatile. Didn't provide a ton of offense, but the numbers showed that on that line with Miller and Besser, they steamrolled opponents. And so territorially, he added to that line. He let JT and Brock sort of do the heavy lifting. And, he's just a smart player. I wonder if the Canucks see a world in which they could move forward with Pia Suter as their third line center. Can they get Teddy Bluger back? And then you'd have 1 through 4 down the middle, which is still a reasonable setup at the center ice position. But when you mention, and let's just use Sean Monahan as an example, I wonder if there is an appetite from Rick Tocchet to sort of go a little sturdier than Pia Suter at center ice to try to replicate what they had in the playoffs for the 2 rounds against Nashville and Edmonton.
Well, absolutely. And I think that with him, like I mentioned, he's going to want some term, right? Yeah. You're not going to get him on a 3-year deal. He probably wants a 4 or 5-year deal. He's a guy that already's gotten his bag once in his career and then kind of fell off a little bit, had a little bit of a resurgence in Winnipeg and kind of got back into it. But in the playoffs, he was pretty quiet, for the Jets. So an interesting name to keep an eye on as we kind of get and look towards free agency here. Nikita Zadorov, another player. There's a lot of smoke the last time we did a podcast around him, and things since then have remained eerily quiet. Not much going on there between the two sides. It takes 2 to tango. And like we've seen before, Jeff, I remember with the JT Miller negotiation, all it takes is one phone call from one side and they can get it done. They both know what the number is. The Canucks obviously know how high they have to get. And from a Nikita Zadorov standpoint, they know that, if they do end up going to free agency, they're probably going to get what they want. It's just a matter of fit, term, and what you're really going to be happy with at the end of the day. But again, still pretty quiet there. Dakota Joshua, as we've been mentioning all along throughout this process, quiet there as well. Filip Hronek, are the Canucks turning their attention towards him now a little bit? But even then, he's got to decide what he wants. They have offer of $52 to $54 million around there. His agent coming out and saying he loves it in Vancouver and things like that. But $8 million, $7.5 million might be a little steep for the Vancouver Canucks for his services, Jeff.
Yeah, and with Zadorov, it was funny because Elliot had reported that maybe he was willing to take a slight discount here. He's on the record as talking about how much he likes Vancouver. And I wrote a piece at Canucks Army over the weekend about what is that number then? There are those models out there that suggest that his next contract is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $5.3 million over 5 years. I wondered if a 6-year term at $5 million per, because it's my understanding, sort of industry chatter, just talking to people, that there have been certainly some volleys back and forth, and that maybe the Canucks have discussed high fours, but I wonder if it's as plain and simple as starting with a 5. I wonder if the 5 is the benchmark for Zadorov. Term isn't a huge issue if I'm looking at that player. I think he could give you 5 or 6 years of what you've seen from Nikita Zadorov. And I even Ian Cole and Tyler Myers showed that you can be effective well into your mid-30s. And so, if it's term, I don't have that big a deal. The dollars, that's what the Canucks have to figure out, because I can see a world in which they would say, okay, we're going to prioritize Hronek, get that deal done. You've got Quinn and Filip as your top pair. You've got Carson Soucy under contract. It sounds like Tyler Myers is just going to be there waiting.
Trending in that direction.
Yeah. And so, you saw what Soucy and Myers, how much Rick Tocchet played them in the playoffs, the matchup role, one of the biggest, tallest defense pairs in the National Hockey League. I could see that being your top 4. And then the question is, want versus need with Zadorov. And I mentioned on Matt and Blake's show earlier in the week, Nikita Zadorov was terrific in the playoffs. Don't get me wrong. I'm not discounting anything that he did in the playoffs. I just wonder, though, if you're committing big money and long-term, there's so many regular season nights where I'm not sure you need Nikita Zadorov, right? Mid-season game against Columbus or Carolina, the sort of sleepy games, that's not where he excels. He showed, he shows up and plays in the playoffs. So that's the premium that you're paying with a guy like Nikita Zadorov. I think you can get through regular seasons without him. You love the intimidation factor. The offense was there in the playoffs as well. But if this is a team that feels like it's really, truly entering its competitive window, then he's probably the kind of guy that you do want around. But if you've got Quinn Hughes and Carson Soucy on the left side already, where does he slot in, and how much can you devote to a guy that ultimately is the third? He may play more than Carson Soucy in some situations, but just on a depth chart, he's probably the third pair left guy, the left side. So nothing's really changed on that front. And here we are approaching the middle of June. Some decisions do have to be made here pretty quickly when it comes to Nikita Zadorov and the rest of these free agents.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned industry chatter and just people that you've talked to and we hear around, high 4s. If it does get to 5, it becomes interesting, because I think that is the number. But you just said right there, what you ended with, $5 million for your 5th, 6th defenseman. It's a tough pill to swallow. And I understand. I get it. Don't get me wrong. He was one of the Canucks' better players in the postseason, and they needed him, and they needed all, 6'11" of Nikita Zadorov, and he scored, and he was getting in the kitchen of the other team's best players and doing everything that you want him to do. But you're 1 or 2 and 3 where your window's there, and then we're going to get into the Tyler Myers situation here a little bit, where maybe deep down in that contract doesn't look too good. I know Tyler Myers played his best hockey this past season. Well, you know what? It was a contract season for him. So generally that is the case for a lot of these players, but it's an interesting one, because I think that Zadorov going to free agency, if he does end up going that route, is going to get what he wants. Are the Canucks willing to go up that high, and is the fit just that important to both of them?
On Myers, and you're right, it is a contract year, and that does seem to bring out the best in a lot of guys. But I just think, too, he found a system that worked for him, that Rick Tocchet and Adam Foote They didn't ask too much of him. They tried to put him in positions to succeed where he could use the physical tools that he's got. And obviously he can't teach the height that he has. And he skates beautifully for a big guy, even at his age. But he didn't try to overhandle the puck. That's when he, in my mind, runs into trouble. He tries to do too much, but with the system and the structure that they had in place, he wasn't forced to do too much. So that there were supposed to be guys where they're, expected to be. You make the simple pass and let somebody else do the heavy lifting in terms of getting the puck out and up ice. And so, he was a whipping boy in this market for a lot of years, was never going to live up to the terms of the contract. But at the end, under this system and with the coaching staff, he played his best. And so I think a lot of people are open to the idea of another year or two with Tyler Myers in the fold, but certainly at a reduced price. And he's not going to work for a league minimum. There's going to be a cost, but I would imagine somewhere in the neighborhood of half of what he was making on that last contract. And again, it sounds like he and his agent, JP Barry, they understand the situation. I think this is where they want to be. And so they're prepared to be patient and sort of sit on the sidelines until the Canucks get some of the other significant deals done. And then they'll see if they've, earmarked enough money on the side there to get a contract in place with Tyler Myers.
Yeah, I think both of them just know, to be completely honest. Like you mentioned, JP Barry and Patrick Allvin, they know exactly where it's going to come in and around. Whether it's actually been discussed or it's on paper or they have a handshake agreement. I don't think that has happened yet. It's not done. And, they've maybe just started talking is why we're hearing things about Tyler Myers. But I can't imagine a situation where he doesn't end up a Vancouver Canuck in training camp next season, unless he decides to go and someone's willing to give him more money. But like you just said, he wants to be here and the two sides are pretty comfortable and are willing to be patient to get the other stuff done before they take care of Tyler Myers.
All right. I mentioned earlier that there really aren't a ton of names that have been linked to the Vancouver Canucks. And I want to be completely clear here that this is not reporting. This is me looking at guys that are heading to unrestricted free agency, and not all of them are going to make it there. Some of them will re-sign with their teams, but I'm going to throw some names. You tell me if there's anybody here that jumps out at you as, and this is sort of that next tier. We're not talking about Jake Gensel or, the sort of the biggest fish, Sam Reinhart. What's Sam Reinhart going to get on a new deal? And that's going to be wild to see how quickly that comes to be when Florida, we'll talk about the Stanley Cup Final a little bit later on. But these are names. Again, the Vancouver Canucks need help on the wings. We know that. That much is clear. I think the hockey world recognizes that. So, players like Anthony Duclair, Jake DeBrusk, Daniel Sprong is interesting to me because all he does is score wherever he goes, and usually at a low price point. I've always had an eye on Jordan Martinook, former Vancouver Giant, guy that just plays hard in Carolina, does a bunch of penalty killing for the Hurricanes as well. Michael Amadio is a name that is set to hit the free agent market. Kiefer Sherwood's in a different category, but man, I noticed him a lot in that Nashville series. Not on the offensive side so much, but he was just a pain in the ass to play against. Played hard, finishes checks. Seems like he might be a Rick Tocchet kind of guy. The problem there is that it's unrestricted free agency. You're probably going to overpay all of those guys, and then it brings you back to the question, are any of those guys better than Dakota Joshua? And the answer is probably no. Jake DeBrusk Duclair certainly had better offensive seasons than Dakota Joshua, but at this stage of his career, I don't know. But that's the deal here is you're trying to find ways to improve this hockey club, and yet it feels like any of those names that I just mentioned there would be a replacement for a guy that did an awful lot of good for you, but maybe has priced his way out of this market.
Yeah, I think we'll start with the first two you mentioned, and Anthony Duclair and Jake DeBrusk. Those are two top six guys, right? So you're going to end up playing top $6 figure for both of them. I think that having them longer term in your top six is probably better than having Dakota Joshua up there, just because what you've seen. There is a track record of both of them being able to score goals and play at an elite level. Jake DeBrusk's name has been in and surrounding the Vancouver Canucks for a number of years now. Kiefer Sherwood, I liked what you said about him. He was great in defensive zone and taking on some big matchups there in that Nashville series. Michael Amadio, I don't know if that name excites me. Maybe a bottom six guy at value, but you're right, Jeff. Guys that you're going to have to overpay. Now, the Canucks regimes in the past have overpaid for guys in the bottom six. I don't think that this regime is going to. You already have a guy that you're overpaying, and he's probably going to be in the bottom six to start the season, if not in your lineup, and that's Ilya Mikheyev. So you can't make that mistake again, right? And I know that he's an anomaly, and, they signed him and things like that, but You just have to be smart about it. Jordan Martinook is a good one. I really might. I think I do like that fit. Plays hard, kind of a Dakota Joshua type of game. Physical, can play, put him on the power play. He can score. You can play him on the PK. He can eat some minutes. So that's the one that's interesting to me. Again, not reporting, just throwing names out there. But if they were to go that direction, I think that, you try and sell Jordan Martinook on maybe coming back to your old stomping grounds where you did have some success here in Vancouver. But as for the other two guys, the Anthony Duclairs and Jake DeBrusk, I think they're going to get paid somewhere, whether it's not on the teams that they currently are on. I just don't know if Vancouver is willing to go up that high. I think, to be completely honest, they're looking at getting creative here. Now, whether they are targeting a restricted free agent that is out there on one of these teams that they're looking at via trade, I think that's the direction they might be looking at to add a winger. But, usually these things are a lot harder to actually make happen than when you hear about them possibly happening.
All right. Well, we'll certainly see that. It comes back to trade chips for the Vancouver Canucks, and we know that when you've peddled as many first-rounders as they have here in recent years,
picks.
It gets difficult. So that's part of the problem too, is like usually by this time of the year, you're all excited about the draft. Well, no first rounder, no second rounder as it stands right now. Like, it's going to be forever on the second day before the Canucks get to make a pick. Now, things can change, so we know that, but just as it stands right now, not a ton of excitement heading into this year's draft at the Sphere in Vegas. So Canucks look like they may be on the outside for a while there, waiting to hear their name called to make a pick. All right. Want to talk about Patrik Allvin, who was the runner-up for the Jim Gregory Award, the National Hockey League General Manager of the Year. We'll get to that in a sec, but want to mention that Rink-Wide is a presentation of the fine folks at the Applewood Auto Group. They've been terrific partners for us here all season long, and we thank them for their support. And right now at Applewood Nissan, Langley, Surrey, and Richmond, you can get the 2024 Rogue. You can lease that from 2.99%. The 2024 Araya lease for finance from 1.99%, and also the 2024 Pathfinder. You can lease for finance from 2.49%. Remember, it's all good at Applewood. Yeah, second place showing for Patrik Allvin, finishes runner-up to Jim Nill, the two-time winner, back-to-back winner of the Jim Gregory Award. And you can see that it wasn't really close. That Jim Nill, a runaway winner, 118 points, first, second, and third place ballots, 17 first place votes for the Dallas Stars general manager. Patrik Allvin nudges out Bill Zito of the Florida Panthers for second spot there. So, look, Allvin did a nice job. You don't get 50 wins and 109 points and win a division and all that kind of stuff. But I've seen in the marketplace that somehow there's this notion that Allvin should have been the runaway winner here. The voting was done at the end of the second round of the playoffs. So keep in mind that at the end of the second round, the Canucks were done, the Stars were advancing, and the Florida Panthers are still playing here and have themselves a tidy little 2-0 lead in the Stanley Cup Final. So, to me, like it's an honor to be nominated kind of thing. I have no issues whatsoever with the way that these votes went down. And again, if Allvin had lost by a vote or two, maybe, but really this was a race for second place, and Jim Nill was he was the lead horse in this thing. As we said, 17 first place votes and 118 points overall. And Dallas Stars have put together an incredible operation and organization through the draft, have added some nice pieces along the way, made the trade for Chris Tanev, that helped them to a point in the playoffs, obviously. So, congratulations to Jim Nill as the National Hockey League General Manager of the Year, and tip of the cap to Patrik Allvin for finishing second place.
I think the one first place vote for Kenny Holland was from Edmonton.
Now that they release the votes, I do love that. I love trying to figure out the ones that get a little love and where did that come from. Now this is other GMs, league executives, and I think a small group of media as well. So we're not going to get full transparency. The results of these ballots won't be released the way the Professional Hockey Writers does for the major individual awards whenever they're presented later this month.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that Jim Nill, obviously that team had an incredible regular season. They were one of the teams to beat, and they got slept on, right? Not a lot of people gave the Dallas Stars that much love. There was this sexy teams in the Western Conferences. Everyone was worried about what Vegas was going to do. The Winnipeg Jets were kind of surging, but that Central Division was Colorado's, right? They have the shiny toys on that team. But you look at Logan Stankoven, you look at Wyatt Johnson, you look at the emergence of their younger guys coming up. I mean, what was it, Jeff? I think they had 7 20-goal scorers on that team to finish the regular season or something like that. But they're a very good team, and it was assembled very well. It's been done, and it's been, something that Jim Nill and his staff have been doing for years, is trying to get these pieces to culminate into eventually going to a Stanley Cup. Obviously, they lost in the conference final there against the Edmonton Oilers. So again, no problems there. I mean, a great season for the Vancouver Canucks. The deals that Alvin did make for Nikita Zadorov and then Elias Lindholm absolutely paid off for him in the postseason. But again, just one win short of the conference final, and maybe that conversation changes a little bit, but no issues with Jim Nill winning that one.
We spent a fair bit of time talking about the Canucks rounding out their coaching staff, promoting Yogi Svedkovsky from within. We saw earlier in the week that Jason Krog's been named Yogi's replacement now as the skills coach, and that's not a surprise. This is a guy that basically has handled a lot of those workouts ahead of training camp, so he's familiar to a lot of the players. That one seems like a pretty good fit. Don't know that we need to go too deep on the hiring of a skills coach, but we should also mention as well, because we wondered when all the dominoes would fall here. But as we record this on a Tuesday, it now is apparent that Jeremy Colleton has found work in the National Hockey League, joining Sheldon Keefe in New Jersey. And if it becomes this 6 degrees of separation, trying to figure out Manny worked for Sheldon Keefe last year, and now he comes to Abbotsford, and that job's open because Colleton's going back to work with Sheldon Keefe, and of course Mike Yeo with Travis Green, and Sheldon Keefe replacing Travis Green. It gets complicated, but that's the life and the nature of the coaching biz in the National Hockey League. But good for Jeremy Colleton, looking for an opportunity to get back in the National Hockey League. Was a head coach in Chicago. He'll probably get another head coaching opportunity at some point. He's only 39. I forgot how young he is to have already got NHL games under his belt and 2 good years out in Abbotsford. And, I think the Canucks would have loved to have been able to keep him in the fold. That's the interesting part to me, is that the Canucks had a vacancy on their staff here as an assistant coach, and ultimately decided to go with Yogi and let Jeremy Colleton explore his options. And he winds up in New Jersey. And so he's back in the National Hockey League. Yeah,
I mean, good for him. To be completely honest, I mean, goes with his buddy Sheldon Keefe over there. And look, I think the New Jersey job is interesting, right? Because there's so much talent on that team. And it's, it's interesting even when Travis went over there to work under Lindy Ruff. It was, they're in win now mode. They're going to make moves in this offseason to get better. They need a goalie. There's no question there. They're probably going to beef up their defense if they can somehow via trade. They've got some excellent pieces up front that they could deal to help make their team better. So yeah, it's a desirable place to go and want to coach that team, but the leash is short, as we've seen for members of people behind the bench, especially Lindy Ruff. I think they just signed him to an extension or something like that, and then they fired him. I mean, we've seen that happen a million times before, but Jersey's an interesting one. And obviously with Manny here, I think a big thing for it was, being really familiar with Manny, knowing about his work ethic, knowing about how much of a student he was of the game when he was playing the game, being that coach for the younger guys. Bo Horvat, if you ever talk to him, I know we have a bunch through our, careers, and, Bo has always talked very highly about a guy like Manny Malhotra, as have Daniel and Henrik Sedin. So that one is going to be an interesting one to see in Abbotsford. But yeah, the 6 degrees of separation. And once you break the coaching barrier down, it's all about who you know. You just got to get in. Sure. That's all it is.
Yeah. I want to remind our listeners and our viewers to take part in the Daily Faceoff Playoff Parlay Challenge each game day. Answer 4 questions, pick the winning team, guess if points are going to be over or under, predict the first goal, choose the highest scoring period. Daily winners snag gift cards, while each round's champs pocket cash. You can play now at games.dailyfaceoff.com. Improve your puck prowess. It's fun, and it's all about hockey. So check that out, games.dailyfaceoff.com. Hey, one of the things we heard over the weekend, the commissioner's State of the Union that he always does ahead of the Stanley Cup, a little bit of clarity on the Four Nations Cup. We got a schedule for that next February, so we all know when the league's going to shut down to allow players from the 4 countries, Canada, the U.S., Sweden, and Finland, to take part in this. The games are going to be played in Montreal and Boston. The championship game in Boston, that was a little surprise to me. I thought...
me too.
Can't go wrong, I suppose, but I don't know, maybe just the homer in me thought it would be on Canadian soil. That's not the case. But what we learned is, Irf, that June 28th, we're going to find out 6 players from each of these 4 teams, the first 6 players named to the roster. So I ask you,
Okay.
Will JT Miller be one of the first 6 American players named later this month?
I don't think so. I think that eventually he does find his way onto that roster. I'm just not entirely sure it's the first 6. Judging just off the top of my head, there's 6 guys. Like, you look at Jack Eichel, Austin Matthews, you go Jack Hughes, you go, or maybe JT Miller. No, I don't know. I don't think so. I think that, I don't know. I really don't.
So, okay, that's my gut reaction as well.
And then you start thinking about it.
JT finished second to Austin Matthews among U.S.-born players this past season. Only Austin Matthews had more points than JT Miller. Like, if you're just going on stats, he'd be an easy pick. But I'm with you that, and it's kind of always been this way for JT, right? You got to keep proving yourself. I think he'll be on the team. I mean, I don't think there's any way, there's not a world in which he's not on that team, but it is kind of funny. I don't know if the first 6, I haven't seen, maybe you have, like, I don't know if they're laying it out like 3 forwards, 2 defensemen, and a goalie, or if it's just a random 6.
Yeah.
Whatever the case, like, I would have to think Quinn is going to be one of the top American picks. Wouldn't, like, Quinn Hughes should be, guy's going to win the Norris. He's 92-point season. I think Quinn definitely will be one of the first 6 on the U.S. team. But I'm with you, JT. It's a little bit of a slap just because, again, the season that he had. But I'm not anticipating him. What about EP40 on the Swedes? Is he one of their first 6?
I think he's like 5.5, maybe. Just look, I don't know. It's funny you mentioned that because I was talking to someone who obviously is Swedish and isn't around the National Hockey League for a long time. He doesn't think he'll be in the first 6 at all, which doesn't surprise me. Well, if you look down the list of guys, right? Like, I mean, there are some really, really good players.
William Nylander and Filip Forsberg were the only guys that had more points than Elias Pettersson. Now, the list isn't going to be done just based on last year's regular season points, but just if you're using that as baseline, JT Miller was second among Americans. Elias Pettersson was third among the Swedes. So I am fascinated to see how this all kind of rolls out. And again, I don't know if it's a massive snub if you're not one of the 6. It's more important to be on the roster. But we'll see how we'll get a little taste of what these 4 nations are thinking as far as the roster construct is concerned. I don't have to worry about Canucks and Finns and Canucks and Canadians because not a lot happening in that department with either one of those 2 teams.
Will Thatcher Demko be the starting goalie for that team, or will it be Hellebuck? And will Canucks fans be upset if he is the starting goalie because of the rest that is important for Thatcher Demko?
I gotta think Hellebuck is going to be the guy, but I certainly am expecting that Thatcher Demko will be on that roster. And again, U.S. just has this luxury of so many good options with Jake Ottinger as well. I think those would be the big 3, but Jeremy Swayman probably wants in on that conversation as well. So, that's always the issue. Can we borrow an American goaltender? Can we just I don't know, find a passport somewhere and make one of those guys? I'd take their 4th stringer right now. That's always the issue with Canadian goaltending, and I'm sure that'll be a topic as things move forward here. But I just think based on the season that he had, the fact that he's probably going to win the Vezina, the track record that he's got, that I think Connor Hellebuck in American hockey circles is ahead of Thatcher Demko, but Demko should absolutely, if he can stay healthy, be on that team. But that's a great point you bring up because we know Canuck fans love to be outraged about just about everything. So, yes, there's probably a large group hoping that Thatcher Demko is the backup and doesn't ever see the ice and doesn't have to play games. And maybe he falls 4th on that list and doesn't even make the team at all so that he can rest up and use that time to, be prepared for the stretch drive and playoffs for next season. So we'll see how all of that plays out. But again, June 28th, we're expected to get some information on those first 6 players for each of the 4 nations teams. All right, I want to talk about the Stanley Cup Final. It doesn't involve the Vancouver Canucks, but it did back in 1994. And in fact, 2 anniversaries on this date, the 11th of June. This was Game 6 against the Rangers, the Stanley Cup Final, considered by many to be the best hockey game ever played in Vancouver at the Pacific Coliseum. I was not there. I watched on television like a lot of people, but remember it well. And the Canucks obviously forced it back to a Game 7 at MSG. We know how that one ended. But the other thing is, and I saw this tweeted by Jason Beck of the BC Sports Hall of Fame earlier today. It was on this day going way back, that Trevor Linden was drafted second overall by the Vancouver Canucks in the 1988 draft. Mike Modano went first. Curtis Lecision went third to the Quebec Nordique. But the idea of the draft, Irf, was on June 11th. Like, what did we do with ourselves for the rest of June back then? The final would have been wrapped up. The draft was done. Like, it is crazy to think that if this thing goes 7, that the Stanley Cup Final is going to be presented on June 24th this year. And going back to 1988, Trevor Linden became part of the Canucks organization. The draft was held on June 11th in Montreal.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, don't need 3 weeks of preseason. I'll tell you that right now. I don't think the players enjoy it that much either. But yeah, look at that picture. TL, so young in that photo as well. But yeah, I mean, to your point, June 24th, like it is long. And then obviously wherever it ends, or I guess it would end in Florida at that point, teams or those two teams would probably have to get up and get ready and go to Vegas and in the Sphere. And that the draft is on obviously the Friday and the Saturday out in Vegas. Yeah, I think shorten the season, shorten the preseason for sure. I know they've talked about it in other leagues. It's crazy. You don't need 3 weeks. The players are already here 2 weeks before working out anyway, in most cases and in most cities. So just shorten the season, shorten the preseason. You can shorten the preseason, get to 82 regular season games, finish early, but then you have the breaks now, right? You're going to have this break coming up for the Four Nations Cup. You're going to have the Olympic break coming up. The All-Star break, I understand why you have to do it. Players don't like it, to be completely honest. So that's another one of those breaks that you need to have. But yeah, shorten the season for sure. I'm all in on that.
Rink Wide Vancouver, presentation of the Vancouver Canadians, who are back at Nat Bailey Stadium this week. Don't miss the nooner at the Nat on Friday the 14th. That includes a rainout doubleheader against Spokane, and fingers crossed that they can get that one in with the forecast here. And of course, Sunday is Father's Day, June 16th. It's a family fun Sunday out at the Nat. Take dad out to the ballpark. You can catch fireworks, giveaways, Friday nooner, superstar appearances all spring and summer long. Get your tickets at 604-872-5232 or go to CanadiansBaseball.com. All right. I will admit that I didn't see an awful lot of Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final on Saturday. It was my son's graduation banquet.
Hey, congratulations,
put another one through high school here. The convocation, getting the actual diploma still a week and a bit away, but had a great night at the Bayshore with all of his grad class. So I did the old, Stanley Cup Final in 30 or whatever. I watched the replay, but I did watch most of game number 2, and I got to give the Florida Panthers credit. Not only down a goal and running away at the end from the Edmonton Oilers, but just the defensive masterclass that they put on. The Oilers didn't have a high danger scoring chance of 5-on-5 through 60 minutes of hockey. Like, we're talking about the Oilers here, McDavid and Draisaitl, and the Edmonton Oilers. They've got 1 goal through 2 games, Irf, and it came from a defense. But like, a forward on the Edmonton Oilers has not scored 2 games into the Stanley Cup Final. So as people in Vancouver know, a 2-0 lead doesn't necessarily guarantee you the cup at the end, but boy, Florida's done what it had to do, take care of home ice advantage, and really backed Edmonton into a corner here in the early going.
Well, the crazy thing is, game 1, Florida wasn't good and still won the game. Yeah. And Edmonton played one of their better games of the postseason that game, and they ran into a hot goalie, right? And that's also an issue with the playoffs as well. It's a luxury when you have the goalie, but if you're the team going up against a guy that's as dialed as Bobrovsky was in game 1 and for better part of game 2 as well, it's going to be tough to score. I don't care if you have Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl on your team. It's funny, though, because that power play, nuclear, for the Edmonton Oilers. And so much people were talking about, the Edmonton Oilers power play and things like that and how their PK was so good. The Florida Panthers PK has been pretty darn good at stopping the Edmonton Oilers as well. I mean, obviously, Bobrovsky has a big part of that, but it's going to be interesting to see here as we go down the road. I don't think that Leon Draisaitl is going to get suspended. I think the health of, Sasha Barkov is going to be, he's going to be okay. He's probably going to play with a couple of days in between games. I imagine it's the Stanley Cup Final. It's going to take a lot to get these guys out of the lineup. Yeah. Warren Fogle, as we record this, is the interesting one as well, right? So that could be a talking point as well. But it's been some fun hockey, to be completely honest. Yep. I mean, these are 2 of the best teams going at it. Best player theoretically in the world going up against the best defensive forward in the world, and Barkov, and he's making it look pretty easy against Connor McDavid right now.
Yeah, and I tweeted out after the game, like, the Oilers can play better. They know that. The
Yeah.
hockey world knows that they can. They have to, obviously. But if you're the Panthers, as you said, like game one, they weren't very good. They haven't really had anything from Reinhart yet.
Yeah.
Matthew Tkachuk hasn't been all that prominent. A little bit of stuff after the whistle that he claimed that he had taken out of his game, but we all knew he was lying when he said that. And even Barkov. And, you hate to see a guy hurt, but that was impressive too, that Florida was able to grind out the win down the stretch without Barkov, who had to leave the game and didn't return. So, I think some of Florida's best players can still give more and be heard from more in this series. And that's not great news if you're the Edmonton Oilers, because, to this point, Evan Rodriguez and Carter Verhaeghe, they're all important pieces of that Florida team, but the top end of the lineup really hasn't been heard from offensively. So fascinating to see where it goes from here. The Oilers would tell you, hey, doesn't really get interesting until the home team loses a game in a series like this one. So we'll see if they can protect home ice. But I don't think it matters to Florida whether they're at home or on the road. They're just a damn good hockey club that's motivated. And 2 down, 2 to go, which brings us to our 4 wins for 4 Wins Brewing feature here on the program. We've been tracking this while the Canucks were playing, while 16 teams were still competing, and then it got whittled down to 8 to 4, and now it is the Stanley Cup Final, but it still takes 4 wins to win the round. And, of course, Florida with a 2-0 lead in the Stanley Cup Final. So there you go. The Panthers and the Oilers, extra day with the travel. Series will resume Thursday and Saturday in Edmonton. In this portion of Rink Wide, a presentation of 4 Winds Brewing, family owned and operated in Delta. Come check out the 4 Winds Brewing tap room and kitchen located in the Tilbury area, serving burgers, beers, and their famous tacos every day from 11 in the morning until 8 p.m. 4 Winds Brewing, also home to the 4 Winds Light Lager, a crisp, clean, and easy drinking beer. Beer for everybody. Perfect beer for before, after, or during the game. 4 Winds Light Lager, you can ask for it at your local liquor store or have some delivered right to your door through the online shop at 4windsbrewing.ca. I know on our last pod, I thought 7 games, and I think you had 6. Are we revising this? Do we think that is there any way that this thing could be a much shorter series than originally anticipated?
Yeah, I do. I had a broom in the closet. I was going to bring it out and just show it. I really was going to do that. I totally forgot now that you mentioned it.
I'm all for props. You need
some props. All the props the one to not. Look, Florida's just better. Like, even last year, people against the Vegas Golden Knights, I understand Vegas was rolling. Florida was decimated with injuries, like a broken sternum for Tkachuk, Listerinen had a broken leg he played with, a separated shoulder, I think it was, for Ekblad, and all sorts of stuff. This team is healthy. And when they're healthy, they're good. Like, they're deep. As much as the Oilers have been good and they're very top heavy and getting contributions from guys like Bouchard and things like that, Darnell Nurse hasn't had a good playoffs. Cody Ceci scratched for the first time, I think, this season, was in the Stanley Cup Final for the Edmonton Oilers. So, Knoblauch is going to have some work to do here. I understand, you get your advantage here on home ice, and you do. But, Jeff, to answer your question, like, I might revise it to 5. Like, I think it could be quick. We'll keep it at 6, but I might think it leaning towards 5 games now.
Well, let's see what Thursday brings. Then really it may be time to completely revise everybody's predictions if Florida is able to get a 3-0 stranglehold. All right, so these 2 teams are in the Stanley Cup Final, but it's never too soon to look ahead to next year. We don't even know who's going to be on the rosters of the 32 teams around the National Hockey League, but that doesn't matter, Irf, because the odds are out. And what are they telling us about the Vancouver Canucks and their chances of being 2025 Stanley Cup champs?
Well, that's the crazy thing. It's one of the things that you look at, and you look at futures and things like that for different teams. Obviously, this segment brought to you by Bet365, proud partner of Sekeres & Price Canucks Conversations. Yes, Jeff, you and I here on Rink Wide Vancouver. Open an account with Bet365 today and bet on a huge range of markets. So whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Yeah, the Canucks are the 8th best odds to win the Stanley Cup next season. Obviously, the Edmonton Oilers, the Dallas Stars, Carolina Hurricanes is an interesting one to be that high up there because they're going to have a lot of turnover heading into next season, and to give them that much love already this soon is wild. Colorado Avalanche, I like. The Leafs are always going to be up there because they're the Leafs. But yes, the Vancouver Canucks, the 8th best odds, right ahead of the Vegas Golden Knights. So take that what you will. If you want to put a future on that, you could make some good money if the Canucks end up winning the Stanley Cup. But that's a long bet to have to sit on if you place it right now.
Well, if you got any thoughts on the long odds of the Vancouver Canucks or anything else that you heard here on the program, if you want your say, we'd love to hear from you. The Great Clips chat line is always open. All of our feedback channels, they're available there on the screen. Hit us up with your thoughts on any of the topics that we covered here, the Four Nations Cup and the idea of some of the Canucks being among the early entries, the general manager of the year, some of those names that we threw out there. And again, I don't want to see anywhere in social space that it was reported on Rink-wide. Those were just names being floated. That's what we do here in sort of the soft spot of the offseason. But if you have thoughts on any of those names, or you've got names of your own that you're keeping an eye on, again, send them this way. We'll try to incorporate them into upcoming shows. With more than 4,400 hair salons throughout the United States and Canada, Great Clips, the world's largest hair salon brand and official hair salon of the National Hockey League, Great Clips. It's going to be great. Well, I know Irf was great. I hope I held up my end of the bargain here, but that'll bring us to the end of another episode of Rink-wide Vancouver. Again, we'll continue to pump these out here throughout the through the offseason, certainly up and through the draft and free agency, and then we'll figure out a strategy for July and August, but we'll do our best to keep tabs on what's going on around this hockey club here and around the National Hockey League. And Irf, I have to think that one of these times, the next time that we reconvene, likely past the middle of June, I got to think that we're getting awfully close to some big Canucks news. I just think it has to happen that way. They can't allow this stuff to stack up until the 11th hour. So one of these days, I think we're going to see the Canucks get a little bit of their own work done internally, whoever it is, whoever they prioritize. But from there, everything else in the offseason can start to flow. So we're not there yet, obviously. There's still time. But time is ticking towards July the 1st now. And by the time that you and I get together and do this again, I think we're going to be the back half of June. We'll be past the midway mark of this month. Yeah. And that certainly will get down to crunch time for the Canucks and all the other teams around the National Hockey League. So should be fun. I think we're in for an exciting couple of weeks here as the Canucks shape the roster for next season.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's funny that you mentioned that. And, there has to be some Canucks news. And we've seen in years past where you thought things are going to happen, players do end up all walking. So, I mean, it's conceivable I don't even want to go there, but it's interesting. Like you mentioned, it's going to be fun the next couple of weeks to see what happens here, especially with this team here in Vancouver.
I want to thank Jacob and Mike, their hard work behind the scenes, helping us out, putting Rink-wide all together for Irf. This is Jeff. Again, thanks so much for supporting us here on the pod in the offseason. Our thanks to the Applewood Auto Group and the Vancouver Canadians as well. That's going to do it for this episode. You've been listening and watching Rink-wide Vancouver.
Thanks for watching this video. For more great content from Canucks Army, check out Sakaris and Price, Rink-wide Vancouver, or our show, Canucks Conversation. We're your one-stop shop for interviews, breaking news, and a live Canucks postgame show hosted by Jeff Patterson.